Yes, I've got the enjoyable task of introducing three excellent speakers today to this session. We've got with us Jane Hutt, Steve Brooks and Norma Jarbo. I'll introduce them as they speak. I think they're intended to speak for about 15 minutes each, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions. Can I just say, first of all, as well, that this is a subject that is very close to my heart. It's really where, as Rosemary mentioned, my academic interests and my practitioner interests in my role as Chair of Sport Wales chime. And I'm delighted that we were able to work with the Minister on a programme to ensure that we get more women elected to boards. And we at Sport Wales volunteered as a very willing guinea pig in some of the work that has been going on through the Welsh Government. And I'm sure the Minister will tell you a little bit about how that has panned out. I'll also say that I think it's extremely important that all of us who do have a position in public life in Wales assist other women. And I think we've got to put our necks on the line over that. You know, there really is no... there's no excuse, basically, for any woman who reaches any position of authority or influence in Wales not to reach out a helping hand to other women, particularly younger women who are coming through. I think we've got to reclaim the notion of role models, because we're all role models at whatever level we work and in whichever community we work. But it's really very, very important that we almost kind of accept that willingly and embrace it passionately and try our best to help other women, because if we don't do that, then really we'll simply have another group of elite women who at this point in time are in senior positions, but there isn't a generation coming behind us. So I think we've got a positive story to tell. I know there are lots of negatives as well about the scale of women in public life, but I hope the balance of what goes on today will balance some of the really important opportunities that there are out there. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, Jane Hutt. She needs very little introduction, really. But Jane's been a member of the National Assembly since the very beginning, since 1999. She's held several ministerial positions in health, education, children, and most recently is the Minister for Budget and Business, but of course also takes the lead on the Equalities Brief. And I know this subject is something very close to Jane's heart as well, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about the work going on in the Welsh Government.
I'm on. Great. Right, Borodra and diolch yn fawr. I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you particularly to Rosemary Butler, our presiding officer, for organising this event, this important event. I know I've followed an excellent presentation and engagement with you, led by Pippa Davies. And I'm delighted also that I'm part of the panel chaired by Professor Laura McAllister. And in fact, I was remembering back this important topic of what we should do to encourage more women's participation and the impact of us all having this huge opportunity and privilege to play our part in the newly emerging revitalised democracy of Wales through the National Assembly. I always remember quite early on, Laura had a bit of academic work where she asked us all what she thought impact we had made. And you recall that research, Laura. And I remember at the time responding to that and saying how I felt hugely privileged and honoured to be in this position, not just being elected as an Assembly member, but to be able to play a part as a minister, something I would never have envisaged I would be considered for in past times. I was a campaigner, activist, and then I'm a minister, and having to take very serious decisions and responsibility collectively in a government. And I think I just first start respond to the point that Laura's made about the fact that you know, we are very fortunate to be here, but we should always be looking to, well, what does this mean for women, not just in terms of the decisions we make, but as role models, but as accessible role models, so that women, and young women particularly, can feel, well, I could do Jane's job. And I'm always saying to young women, you know, we need to get you ready to do my job or to stand in my place or to make sure that you feel encouraged and supported. So it's about ensuring we've got successors, and I don't have any doubt we've got plenty. And in fact, this week we've been really celebrating the children and young people's, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, participation of young people, And we know that there are a lot of young people very engaged in particularly through their school councils, their youth forums, and getting increasingly engaged in politics at a very early age. And we want them to follow us in and take our jobs as soon as possible. For some of them, they're ready to go, I know. So I'm just going to focus, as today in my ministerial role, hugely important to have the role as being Minister for Finance, and also having responsibility for equality matters, because it does mean that I have a very influential role to embed equalities in the policies and delivery of the government, to ensure that the Welsh Government makes strides to increase the number of women in public bodies in Wales. And that's the focus that I'm going to concentrate on today, how we can, just one part of my role, as Finance Minister and Equalities Minister, and very much key to our programme of government. How can we get more women engaged, involved in public bodies? And actually, we're driven not just by a programme of government, but by our Strategic Equality Plan. And one of our objectives of the Strategic Equality Plan, which I launched in April of this year, is to improve the engagement and participation of underrepresented groups in public appointments. And we came up with our equality objectives as a result of extensive consultation, engagement across Wales with underrepresented groups, particularly with women's groups. And I do think Professor McAllister is proof of what women in public leadership roles can achieve, because, as she said, I mean, the work that Sport Wales and with officials in the Welsh Government, the work that they've done to show that we can make a difference in terms of those public appointments is exemplary. And I just want to say a few words about that, because the work that's been undertaken has resulted in a very good, excellent case study on the recent Sport Wales public appointment process. And if they can do it, everyone else can do it, and that's the message to my colleagues in government. So this case study was identified through the Equality and Human Rights Commission group, which brought a number of organisations together to explore the actions that could be taken to increase the numbers of women in public appointments in Wales. And in the beginning, the appointments process, to make the changes, Sport Wales evaluated the gender makeup of their board, and they addressed this imbalance at board level. They took on board the fact that they had a problem. They realised that to make that change, they had to do significant groundwork, and that they needed to be proactive, and they needed to reach out to women. They needed to encourage them to apply for appointments. So again, our Public Appointments Board unit in the Welsh Government, working with Sports Wales, together they evaluated and, for example, made changes to the language used in the job specifications and advertisements that quite often put women off. And many of you in this room might have been put off by the language in those adverts and those job specifications. It didn't dilute the process, and of course what happened, as always does happen, is the quality of women who applied was highlighted. I mean, women came forward, as they will do if they think that this is for them, and of course the quality was excellent. So I think the work that was undertaken by Laura McAllister, very much led, I would say, by Laura in her role as chair, the lead role in Sports Wales is such an important case study, and it does show, the findings of this does show how leadership, commitment and drive demonstrated by a chair of a public body can play such an important part in the appointments process. It's paid off, this work. It's made a difference in terms of the numbers of women they appointed. Sports Wales now has a gender ratio of 5 women, including the chair and vice chair, and 9 men on its board. But a huge development and progress. I think we might have the vice chair here as well today. But the inclusive Sports Wales appointments process has shown that women were considered rightly as potential as to be valuable board members. But it does have to come from the top. It does have to come from that leadership, that drive, backed by us in Welsh Government, which Laura took forward. So it does very much resonate with us that we've not been looking in the right places, not encouraging women to apply, not exploring other ways to reach women who may not be aware of public appointments, or just would not put themselves forward without some encouragement. We're now engaging fully in this work in the Welsh Government, so we have many important opportunities and responsibilities in terms of approving public appointments. Ministers can make a difference to this, and we do need to be assured that public bodies are doing all they can to ensure their boards are balanced and reflect the society in which we live. So we should use our influence to encourage more diverse boards, to be able to ensure that women are better represented in public life in Wales. So as well as with my cabinet colleagues, we're disseminating the case study findings to all sponsored divisions, all chairs of public bodies, on all those who took part in the case study. This information will be disseminated in the coming weeks. And I go back to my point about embedding equality in government. This is about mainstreaming equality, sharing good practice, encouraging women to apply for future appointments. Just very quickly to say we've looked at the evidence which, in terms of our public appointments, which show that number of women in public appointments is not proportionate to male-female ratio in the general population. So we have got to take action. If we look at the data, we collate it and publish it in April each year. It does show some good progress in some areas. So if we look at the advisory Welsh Government-sponsored bodies, number of women appointed increased by 22% in 2000, from 22% in 2009 to 36% in 2012. But if you look at executive Welsh Government-sponsored bodies and NHS bodies, actually the number of women appointed has reduced. I mean, and that's where the power lies. Advisory is great. We've got that increase, and often that's a step forward into the executive. I remember my first public appointment many years ago was to a community health council, and it was great to have that role. And I went from then to standing for a local authority, for local government, and obviously then into the assembly. So, but we should have that improved representation on executive Welsh Government bodies, particularly NHS bodies. So I think these figures are a stark warning to us in government that we have to take action. We've got to be proactive. We've got to push forward. And Sport Wales shows us, their case study, how this can be done. I just want to also say that if we don't intervene, it's unlikely that representation on women in these boards, these executive Welsh Government-sponsored boards, will improve. And in fact, it may decline. So I think hopefully this conference today can back me in that mission and that goal in government. Secondly, we have a programme for government commitment, which is to seek to introduce Norwegian-style quotas for appointments to public bodies in Wales, ensuring that at least 40% of appointments are women. So that commitment also enables us, and in fact strengthens the case for action to ensure women are visible and represented in public bodies in Wales. And I think the visibility of women is fundamentally important because we need to make sure, and we know, and I know Norma will be talking about this, we don't have the visibility in terms of gender makeup and indeed other underrepresented groups in boards across the sectors, not just public sector, private and third sector as well. And I'm bringing a paper to Cabinet in the new year on that particular programme of government appointment, the way in which we can achieve that commitment. I think, of course, other underrepresented groups do come into this in my equalities role, and there are lessons to be learned, I think, particularly from the case study in terms of how we encourage other groups to apply for public appointments. But also not just the work we're doing because we sponsor public appointments, but the work we're doing to try and resource women's organisations to enable women to participate in public life is critical. And we do, of course, fund groups through the Advancing Equality Fund. It was great to see all the stands outside, particularly Women Making a Difference, who've made such a difference. That project between 2010 and 2013, which we fund. And that has worked to increase the number of women who've got the skills, ability, confidence, and mindset to become leaders in their communities and decision makers. So hugely valuable. What positive outcomes from that, our investment in Women Making a Difference, and in the investment then coming through to those women who are now blossoming and moving forward and making progress in their lives and getting into influential positions. We've also funded the Women's Equality Network Wales, again here today, they're working hard to ensure that we hear the views of women across Wales, including again tackling the barriers that many women face in terms of their participation in public life. And of course that includes, when network includes all the women's organisations that have been so influential, including the Wales Assembly for Women for so many years, and all the other organisations that are important to the network. We've got a new grants regime starting in the autumn of next year. We're consulting closely on that to make sure that we can steer our commitments more effectively to have the kind of outcomes we need. And also funding for International Women's Day next year. Many of you will have already seen the theme is Visible Women Empowering Girls and Women in Wales, tying in very well with the topic here today. And again, the Women's Equality Network is steering this for us, is managing this for us, and there's lots of events and opening up opportunities to give feedback in terms of applications. And I know that will encourage and empower women in terms of their life chances. I just finally want to say that these are very difficult economic times, very challenging times, and equality and representation becomes more, not less important during these times. And a recent report by the Women's Resource Centre finds that it's women who are at the sharp end of the effects of this austerity. And we must recognise this as we take into account our aims to increase women's representation. So we're doing all we can as a government to listen to evidence, to mitigate against the effect that austerity measures are having on women in Wales. Obviously, I'm seeking to reflect that in the budget. And I believe very strongly, and I'm saying again today very clearly, undertaking equality impact assessments is a key part of policy making process, so that we can take into account the needs of people and women in particular from the very first stage of policy making and budget decisions. And you may be aware, and I hope you are, that this week the Prime Minister announced that UK government departments need not produce equality impact assessments. And this was part of their so-called red tape challenge. Well, I'm reaffirming today my commitment to carry out equality impact assessments when delivering policies, a key part of the Equality Act of that legislation that was come into being. If you look at our equality impact assessment for this year's budget, you will see how ministers have made decisions in order to protect particular budgets where we have evidence that women are particularly affected, or, for example, other groups with protected characteristics. Equality impact assessment tool is key, and we're committed to it. So I think finally I just want to say that in terms of our commitment to extending and addressing the impact of our decisions, and the decisions that the impact it makes on our communities, businesses and local economies, that participation of women in public life and in our communities and in government and in all our public and elected bodies is crucial. I'm looking forward to hearing from Norma, in terms of the work that she's done, the report that she's done. So many talented women in Wales would make excellent public appointees. And of course, we're missing out on a huge pool of talent by having so many leaders and decision makers from one particular and particularly similar backgrounds. So finally, very strongly, as your Finance Minister and Minister for Equalities, giving you that commitment again that we as a government are seeking to be more proactive, determined to encourage women's participation. Every opportunity that I have as Minister, I will take forward to help achieve a gender balance. And that, of course, will assist us in creating a fair and just society. So very much look forward to hearing from Stephen and Norma. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Jane. Thank you very much indeed for that. I think you're going to stay with us until 12, so there will be time for questions at the end of this. Can I introduce our next speaker, Steve Brooks? Steve is the director of the Electoral Reform Society in Wales, which is a lead partner in Counting Women In campaign, which I think is a really significant campaign around women in democracy and women in public life. Steve's got a very interesting CV in that he's held a number of positions in Welsh life as head of Oxfam Cymru, head of Sustainable Development Commission Wales, and of course was a former president of the National Union of Students in Wales. I've had a lot to do with Steve in terms of work around women's representation and gender in politics generally, and I think they're doing some excellent work to really champion the need to get more women elected and more women appointed to public bodies.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks for that introduction. As Laura said, I'm from the Electoral Reform Society in Wales, which is an NGO which campaigns to build a better democracy both here in Wales and right across the UK. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about women in politics. And I think today is actually quite an important day for women in politics, because today's the day that the 4 Welsh Police and Crime Commissioners take up their posts. And if anybody's looked at the details, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands of how many of you voted last week, because that might be slightly embarrassing, because turnout was just below 15% in Wales. But before the election, 2 of the 4 chairs of the police authorities in Wales were women. After the election, all 4 police and crime commissioners are men. So I think it says quite a lot about the scale of the challenge that we've still got to do. Can I also thank Rosemary Butler, not only for hosting the conference today, but also the leadership she's shown in her role as presiding officer on this issue. As Jane said, it's crucially important people in public life do use their leadership role to make positive advances on this. And hopefully you'll have noticed I'm a man, so not only will I be able to give you an NGO perspective on why women's representation matters to an organisation like the Electoral Reform Society, but perhaps I'll also be able to offer a male perspective on why all of this matters. And on that, I think it's important to remember that women's representation isn't just an issue for women, it's an issue for men as well. It's an issue for me for 2 reasons. Firstly, out of principle, as somebody who hopes one day to be a father, I want to know that any daughter of mine will enjoy the same rights and the same opportunities as any son that I might have. And if my daughter turned around to me one day and said, "Dad, I want to go into politics," I might think she was slightly mad and might try and encourage her to get more gainful employment. But I want to know that she'd be able to succeed on ability and on potential and not get locked out of power because of her gender. Secondly, I think women's representation matters to me as a man out of self-interest and the interest in my community. As Jane said, Wales and around the world, we're facing massive issues, massive challenges as a society. We've got things like runaway climate change, an ageing population, long-term unemployment. And put simply, we cannot afford, as a nation, nor indeed a planet, to simply write off the contribution and the human capital of 50% of the population. The Electoral Reform Society believes that all citizens should have the opportunity to shape the decisions that affect their lives. Wales, as a society, can only truly prosper when Wales, as a nation, is strong. So strengthening democratic governance, maximising voter participation and ensuring fairness and equality are principles at the heart of our vision for a representative democracy. That means that the form, function and culture of our institutions is fundamental to, and not a distraction from, creating a fairer, more prosperous Wales. And it's for this reason that the Electoral Reform Society has co-founded the Counting Women In Coalition, a movement of women's and democracy NGOs which includes Forset, the Centre for Women in Democracy, Hansard and Unlock Democracy. The aim of the coalition is to secure gender balance in all UK parliaments and assemblies by 2018. Overly ambitious, some people would say, given where we are in 2012. Overly depressing, I would say, if it's not achievable 100 years on from universal suffrage. But let me give you an example about why women in politics matters. Less than a fortnight ago, we marked Remembrance Sunday and paid tribute to the contribution our armed forces make. In Parliament, we have a House of Commons Defence Select Committee, which scrutinises and holds to account the Ministry of Defence. And that committee, since its establishment in 1979, has historically been a fortress of male MPs. And historically, discussions have focused on things like weapons systems, equipment, and geopolitics, what I perhaps call boys' toys. And it wasn't until the women gained its first female member that it began to consider wider issues like access to health services, housing, and the pay and conditions of servicemen and women. And do you know what the number one set of issues is for affecting the morale of our armed forces? It's things like health services, housing, and pay and conditions. So getting more women into politics has a direct impact on the strength of our democracy, which in turn has a direct impact on the strength of us as a society and our quality of life. So how is Wales faring? Well, the honest answer is fair. We are a world leader in women's representation in the National Assembly, but we are a world laggard in women's representation in Welsh local government and in the UK Parliament. And even in this institution, which is a world leader, progress is stalling and risks falling. The representation of women in the Assembly has been one of devolution's true success stories. It was a stated goal of devolution to include more people in the decision-making process. In the first Assembly, women constituted 40% of members. In 2003, this rose to 50% and went even higher following a midterm by-election. That success was largely down to two parties: Welsh Labour, with its policy of twinning and all-women shortlists, and to a lesser extent, Plaid Cymru, which achieved results through reserved seats for women atop of its regional lists. The record of the Welsh Conservatives was less successful. Its 1999 intake had more Davids than it did women. And whilst the Welsh Liberal Democrats have had gender balance until 2011, that's been achieved largely by default rather than design. And while the Electoral Reform Society would commend both Welsh Labour and Plaid Cymru for their historic performance on equality, it's because both parties have already demonstrated so much potential that to a large degree responsibility rests on them to take action. 2007 was a landmark election. It was the first time that the proportion of women AMs fell. In 2011, that decline accelerated. We've gone from a high of 52% in 2006 to around 40% today. Now, we're still leaps and bounds ahead of other institutions in the UK and globally, but nevertheless, it's clear that we're beginning to move backwards. And why has this happened? Well, in 2007, Labour has scaled back its commitment to positive measures, like in the selection of constituency candidates, and it relied instead on zipping, that is, placing a man first, a woman second, a man third on its regional lists. And of course, when the Labour vote is high, it wins more constituency seats, less regional seats, and so the impact is obvious. And Plaid Cymru too has rolled back on its policy of guaranteeing the top spot of each of its regional lists for women. The result has been similar for both parties. For Welsh Labour and Plaid Cymru, the proportion of women AMs is in decline. Broadly, for both parties, it's returned to its pre-peak levels. But unless action is taken, the 2016 elections could see a further decline. The result being an historic low in the proportion of Labour and Plaid Assembly members who are women. By way of example, of the 23 new Assembly members elected in 2011, nearly 2/3 were men. What we are seeing is an erosion in the number of women Assembly members. Those candidates successfully elected in the early years of devolution, like Jane, under positive measures like twinning and zipping, are retiring and being replaced by men. In Cardiff South, Isloin, Pontypridd, Swansea East and Clwyd South, all fairly or very safe seats for Labour, men have replaced women. And even more worryingly, of the 8 most vulnerable seats in the National Assembly, the 8 seats most at risk of changing hands at the next election, 6 are held by women. So because Labour and Plaid Cymru have such a strong record on this, but have been moving backwards, it's incumbent on both parties to take action to reverse that decline. That is the good news. Wales's world-leading record in women's representation sadly stops at the National Assembly. The picture for local government is less positive. Following May's council elections, just over a quarter of our councillors are women. That's up from just under a quarter, a 1.5% rise. At this rate of progress, a young girl born today will have to wait for her 64th birthday before we achieve gender equality in our town halls. Across Wales, women's representation varies. Academics talk about the 30%, the bare minimum an institution needs to drive change forward. 6 councils, Swansea, Cardiff, RCT, Torfaen, Monmouthshire and Flintshire, pass this bare minimum. Swansea Council today is at a level almost equivalent to the National Assembly in 1999, which is A, to be commended, and B, also goes to show that progress can be made. At the other end of the league table, 6 councils have fewer than 1 in 5 female councillors. The council with the lowest, perhaps thickest glass ceiling is that beacon of democracy, Anglesey, followed by Merthyr, Ceredigion, Pembrokeshire, Wrexham and Blaenau Gwent. And with Labour doing well in the last council elections, you might expect the proportion of women in local government would rise substantially, but sadly, not so. And while the party has achieved great things, and I think Jane will like me for saying this, the Vale of Glamorgan, where the Labour group is 50-50 male-female, the party still has work to do in places like Merthyr Tydfil, where women make up just 13% of the Labour group. And contrast that against the Conservatives in Monmouthshire, where 37% of the Tory group on that council are women. And you'll see that all the parties have work to do in different parts of Wales. Now, Plaid Cymru may draw comfort from the fact that all of their senior party positions, their senior elected officers and their senior paid staff are women. But again, just 22% of Plaid Cymru councillors in the party's heartlands are women. And local government is important for 2 reasons. Firstly, something like £8 billion, I think, I'll defer to Jane again on that, is spent by local government. Key decisions on schools, adult services and employment are all taken by local government. So if our town halls are women-free zones, how can we be sure that women's voices are being heard in those decisions? And secondly, and perhaps more importantly for political parties, local government is a well-trodden path to national office. It's in local government where tomorrow's talent can be nurtured, where younger politicians can learn the ropes before entering Parliament or the Assembly. But for women, even entering local government is sometimes an uphill task. But if the picture for local government is less than positive, then the current outlook for Wales in Westminster is gloomy, I'm afraid. Since the Act of Union in 1536, or since universal suffrage in 1918, Wales has elected just 13 female MPs. Between the 1970 general election and the 1984 Cynhaliwyd Valley by-election, Wales had no female MPs. We have never had a female Welsh Conservative MP. And if you're a woman born in Wales, you have a greater chance of being the Prime Minister of Australia than you do a Plaid Cymru Member of Parliament. Of the 9 female MPs elected since 1997, 7 were selected using all women shortlists. And it is this very lack of women in Parliament that sends a clear message to other walks of life that it's okay to cut women out from positions of power. So lastly, what needs to happen? How can we reverse the decline in the proportion of women AMs? How can we get more women elected to local government? How can we get a Parliament that looks more like the Britain it seeks to represent? There's no question that politics needs to catch up and join the 21st century. Our political parties have a big role to play. They must ensure their systems and their structures help rather than hinder women interested in politics. Each of the 4 main parties must take a long, hard look at how they promote equality. For parties like Labour and Plaid Cymru, who are self-described socialist parties, internal culture allows for measures like all-women shortlists, reserved seats and zipping. For the Conservatives, it looks like softer measures, things like early intervention in the selection process, reserving newly vacant seats for women and providing support from the leadership, all pay dividends. And for the Liberal Democrats, many of whom will have principled objections to positive action, thought needs to be given as to whether training and mentoring aspiring women activists is enough in its own right to make its elected representatives truly representative of the population. And I think we need all 4 party leaders, Carwyn, Andrew RT, Leanne and Kirsty, to make a commitment for each of them to say clearly, publicly and loudly that in the next Assembly they will lead a party which is gender balanced, and that they'll do something about local government so that the little girl born today won't have to wait for her 64th birthday before town hall equality is achieved. So I think, to finish, all of us in this room can play a part, whatever our role in public life, whether we're a member of a political party or whether we're just a member of the public. We can all press for change and help to drag our politics back into the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Steve. And finally, to move on to our third speaker, I'm delighted to introduce Norma Jarbo. I'm sure most of you already know Norma from her work with the Presiding Officers Initiative. Norma is the founder of Women Count, which is a not-for-profit organisation that's been indexing women's leadership, particularly in the third sector and the charitable sector. As Rosemary mentioned earlier, you have in your packs the latest report, which looks at women leaders in charities in Wales, which is a follow-on from the work that Norma's done looking at charity leaders across the United Kingdom. She's got a fantastic record of working with public-private voluntary organisations and looking at leadership and diversity issues in an advisory and consultancy role. And I'm sure Norma's going to talk about the next phase of her work with us now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One of the very difficult things about being the last speaker in the panel is I have to follow everything that came before, and my head is swimming, and I'm already wanting to discuss all of it with you. But can I say, first of all, thank you very much to the presiding officer for having invited me to be here today and for ensuring that the research was published in the pack today. So many thanks for that. I have a passion for the voluntary sector and for working in private-public partnerships in a cross-sector. And over the last several years, in terms of my work in women's development, I worked mainly with private sector companies and some government bodies. And I saw this growing movement about women's representation in the senior ranks of these organizations, at the board, the chief executive, the chair level, the finance officer. But somehow or other, people talking about setting targets, but somehow or other the charity sector, which is such an important part of the third sector, seemed to be slipping under the radar. And yet, if you read all the information about the new millennial society and the knowledge society, we're told that these kinds of organizations and social enterprises will be really important in growth industries in the future, and there will be more and more partnership with them. Well, if that's the case, then we need to be concerned about who leads these organizations. In 2012, the EHRC here in Wales identified a number of key challenges going forward in terms of women in Wales and diversity. And one of these is increasing participation of protected groups in decision-making and making Wales public, private, and third sectors representative of the people they serve. And what I hope the first piece of work I've done here on Wales will do is actually support people who are trying to do this by informing them of what the status quo is right now in the large charities in Wales. For those of you who think, oh, charity, and we put that sort of in another box, and it's somebody fundraising and with a can, or you get a donation form in the mail or whatever, charities are big business, and charities are very important to our society. They and their leaders matter very much to the quality of our society. They're actually a cornerstone, if you think about it, of civil society. They've been here for centuries, and they deliver public benefits over a very wide range of areas that affect the quality of our life. It can be arts, it can be education, cultural and heritage, sport, the protection for the vulnerable, relief of poverty. So they're very, very important in terms of their values of social justice and the kind of areas they address that affect our quality of life. In Wales, we have some 8,000 charities that are registered with the Charities Commission. There will be many, many more third sector organizations, which I think we need to do some work on, but haven't gotten there yet. And they have something like, the Charities Commission reports 1.9 billion in income or turnover, and they have over 40,000 volunteers. So this is really, it's I think actually over 40,000 employees, and the 100 in my study had over 20,000 volunteers, so it was even more than that. The leaders matter very much. We have to remember most of these charities are actually limited companies, and they're registered at Companies House. Every director of a charity is responsible for vision, strategy, the financial accountability of that organization, and overseeing that the operational delivery is effective. So the leaders are very important in terms of determining how well that charity operates and about its public accountability as well. But really importantly, this charitable sector, the third sector, is becoming a huge partner with the public sector in delivering services on their behalf, and also with a lot of private sector organizations in reaching stakeholders that they think are important to them. And if the charitable sector is going to be a big deliverer of public services on behalf of government, well, then we have a right to demand that it embodies our values of diversities. Otherwise, I don't think it has a legitimate role in delivering those services on behalf of our elected representatives. So that's why I think charities and their leaders matter. Gender diversity matters as well. There's a lot of research out there on why diversity matters and why gender diversity matters. It certainly matters in governance of a charity. Cass Business School and the Compass Partnership recently produced a study delivering effective governance in charities, and they identified diversity as one of the 6 most important things in governance of a charity, but they on a criteria set of 20, and they found that 36% of the charities in the surveys didn't meet the standard. So there's a lot of work to be done there. There's tremendous McKinsey and other research out there about why gender diversity matters in terms of organizational effectiveness. McKinsey did 2 flagship studies that are quoted all the time that are applicable to all sectors. And it looks at, they were called Women Matter and Women Matter Too. And the first one looked at something like 9 indications of organizational excellence in companies or just a lot of different kind of organizations, and found that when there were 3 or more women in senior management, that the organization scored higher against these 9 criteria of organizational excellence. They, in Women Matter Too, looked at a second study and looked at the skills for the future and found that actually women embody so many of the skills needed for success in the future that have been identified. And what is really interesting, the one that women don't do too good in, which is probably the least relevant to the knowledge society of the 21st century, is command and control. Which is really part of the heritage of the old industrial period, and certainly not suitable, I think, for today. Another couple of quick pieces of information about why it matters. Charities need to innovate. We all need to always be entrepreneurial and innovative in terms of ideas. The London Business School found that the optimal gender mix for innovation was 50% men and 50% women in teams. And if you're thinking about risk in terms of what happened in 2008, well, it's really important actually to think about women and what they bring to risk assessment in organizations. Leeds University did a study of something like 17,000 small businesses that went bust in 2008, and found that if they had 1 woman on the board, it released the probability of going bust by 20%, and if they had 2 or more, it was even better. So charities live in difficult times. They need to actually have these kind of diverse boards so they're efficient as well. It also matters because public funders' expectations are important when they have them deliver services on their behalf or fund them. I think all of you are aware of the public duty enshrined in the Equality Act of 2010, and I'm very pleased to see that in the Welsh Government's Equality Plan and Objectives for 2012 to 16, that they have enshrined in there that they will take every opportunity through public procurement to advance equality of opportunity and improve employment practices. So it's important for public policy expectations, stakeholder relations. Women are actually the majority of employees, donors, volunteers in charitable organizations, and they are also a large base of recipients of the services that are offered through charities on behalf of public bodies. And another issue, I think, for stakeholder relations and why a gender balanced board might help, charities have a pay gap as well as other organizations. The latest study shows that they have a 16% pay gap among their chief executive officers, and in some categories it rises to 30%. So hopefully men and women on boards, more equally balanced, will address that better. I'd like to tell you just a little bit about the index. The index is 100 charities, which you've got in front of you, and I want to tell you a bit about what it shows. They range in income from about 1.6 million to 40 million, but most of them are under 10 million and 5 million. And some of the highlights of the findings are a bit, I think, concerning. Well, first of all, the good news is that women are better represented, certainly in leadership roles in the charitable sector than in other sectors. The study looks at chairs, chief executives, and directors by organizations, because I love league tables, because it doesn't give anybody a place to hide under an aggregate number. So it's good news that women do better in the charitable sector, but they still don't claim the proportion of leadership positions which you think they would have in a sector in which they have contributed so much. So if we look at what the proportion is of men in the charitable sector in these top 100 in Wales, 75%, 3/4 of these charities on the list have a majority of male trustees. And they are the ones that in law are responsible for that organization. 66%, 2/3, are chaired by a male, and 62% have a male chief executive. So we have a long ways to go, although women do better in the charitable sector than in other sectors. The index also shows us, and I've always thought money is sort of a male thing. It's about power. It's about, being very responsible for something big. When you look at the charities over 10 million, and there are about 13 of them in the study, these charities account for about half of the turnover on the list, and males predominate in the leadership of these charities. All of the boards of these charities over 10 million have a majority of male trustees. The average number of female directors slips to 30% as opposed to 35% as the list as a whole, and only one of the charities has a female chief executive. So a lot of work to be done there. The index also tells us that the composition of the board is important in terms of appointing the chairs and the chief executives of these organizations, which are important leadership opportunities. Charities that have 3/4 or more male trustees rarely, if ever, appoint a female chair. Only 2 in this group in the study do. And they are even less likely to appoint a female chief executive. So and they almost never have a female chair and a chief executive. So when you think about it, there's this whole interaction between the board, the chair, the appointment of the chief executive, and then the appointment of the officers that come below the chief executive. So the composition of the board matters. The index also tells us, which I find very interesting, that charities with 75% or more women act quite similarly to men that have to organizations that have 75% or more men, and that what they tend to do is appoint the women. There are only 7 charities in this group, so it's not terribly worrying in terms of the imbalance. But all of these have a female chair, and all but one have a female chief executive. And if what we're aiming for is balance in terms of the true value of diversity in which men and women share leadership, what we're looking for is actually a gender-balanced board. And I'm delighted to see that the Assembly's opting for the Norwegian model in terms of the public appointments. The desired board balance, from my perspective and others, is that it's 60% men or women, but hopefully it won't always be just 40% women, that we'll have some 60% women boards as well. In this study of the top 100 in Wales, only 28% of these charities are gender balanced, and only 7 actually achieve parity of 50-50%. But these organizations, importantly, are much more likely to appoint a female chief executive, but not necessarily female chairs. So that becomes important. If you look at charities across the different kind of areas they operate in, you get a very mixed view of what's going on, and I think we need to drill more down into what's happening in various types of sectors. It's good to see that those charities, such as the WCVA, the Community Foundation in Wales, who support the voluntary sector, on the whole are gender balanced. 80% of them are gender balanced. And they sort of split the chair and female sort of balance. 80% have male chairs, and 80% have female chief executive officers. So that's an interesting one. I was surprised by arts bodies. They tend to not have gender balanced boards. The 2 that do are charities as well as publicly appointed bodies, the Arts Council and the National Museum. And I think that maybe one of the reasons for that, but I'm not certain, because I think really there's no shortage of women interested in the arts or in the arts, is that these tend to be big money charities. And again, we see somehow male trustees, male chief executives and chairs as the proper kind of people to run a large organization, particularly when big money's involved. I'm quite stunned, and it's true on the national studies as well, that the environmental charities seem to not do very well at all in terms of women board members or chairs. And this showed up on the national study as well. Only 10% of them are gender balanced, and 90% have male chairs, although women are okay in terms of the CEO positions. And I'm trying to drill down into why it should, because sustainability is such an important issue in Wales, and women are interested in the environment, why are these organizations working in this field not more gender balanced? Drug charities and counseling services tend to be have very good gender balance, but they tend to be chaired by men. And as we had an example of this week, religious organizations do tend to be quite gender unbalanced. Though I know that many of them are trying to work in this space. And some of their numbers, actually, if you look at the report, are better in terms of women's representation than some of the charities. For example, some of them will have 33%, 25% women trustees. Merthyr Tydfil Institute for the Blind doesn't have any women trustees. So, you know, you can see in a number of other charities, I just give that one as an example. So that's something we need to address. Recommendations for action, and I have to say these are my recommendations, and I'm anxious to hear what people have to say, debate them, tear them apart. First of all, I think charities with gender balance would do well to advertise this, to celebrate it, to put it in their annual reports and put it on their website, because it creates an industry standard and it helps inspire others to do it, and it makes it so much more acceptable to talk about it rather than to sort of apologize first and I want to talk about the women's thing, you know. Put it right out there as good practice. I think others who don't have gender balance should set targets, whether they're aspirational targets or they're quotas. And while I like to see people do things in a voluntary way, along with many other women who've worked in this field, I'm no longer afraid of quotas and what it means. I hear so many women say, oh, I wouldn't want to be there other than on merit, and I wouldn't want to think I was a tick box exercise. Well, I don't know why we think it's a meritocracy now. Almost all the research, you've met some of them too, have you? But almost all of the research, whether you're looking at charities or you're looking at large corporate boards, shows that actually people recruit their board members, and often they're candidates for chief executives and chairs, from their own networks. And so it needs to be opened up. And what targets do, people aren't just going to put anyone on a board when it's important. They're going to go out and find the talented women, and the talented women are out there. I was amazed at reading the biographies of some of these women in the various charities where they have the biographies, and they're excellent. Great talent out there, and people can go find it. Charities recruit trustees robustly and transparency. Apparently, I think, is a very important thing to do, as do others like the Welsh Council of Voluntary Organizations and, you know, Charity Commission and others. Unfortunately, not enough organizations do succession planning, advertise, have good job specs, interview properly. So much of it is still word of mouth. So robust and transparent recruitment is important in all sectors, and certainly the charity sector. And one of the key recommendations, which I think is so important, is that public funders use the power of the purse. They can do it in procurement, under the guides for the public duty, the guidelines for the public duty, and I think it's even easier to do it in the grant funding area. And why shouldn't they do it? They are funding these organizations to do work on behalf of the public at large, so their diversity matters a great deal. And if you look at the accounts of the charities in this study, over half of them, on the vast majority, get more than half of their funding from the public purse, whether it be the Welsh government or local authorities or other public bodies. Stakeholders should encourage board diversity. How many of you here donate to a charity? Have worked for a charity? Have volunteered for a charity? Have we ever said to them, why does your board not look like me? You have tremendous power as a stakeholder of these charities to ask these questions, and you should be feel empowered to do it. And finally, it would be great to see public and private sector board appointments sourced from women in the charity sector. There's great talent there in terms of chief executives, chairs, and directors, trustees. We need to identify them, get them networked in. There's tremendous scope for the organizations already working on public appointments, like Women Making a Difference and When Wales, to come together perhaps with headhunters and the Institute of Directors, the CBI, to get these women a higher profile, to get them networked in, and to let them know that the door is open for them to become public appointees. I'll stop there. I think I'm losing my voice anyway. But Doc and Val, thank you very much for listening so attentively.
Thank you very much, Norma. I think we've heard three really interesting perspectives on what are very common themes, really, in terms of levels of representation. So we've got some time now to open up the floor to questions and answers. I can see hands going up straight away. I'm supposed to tell you, can you make sure that you, once I point to you, that you press the black button on your microphone so that it's activated? And perhaps you could introduce yourselves as well and say who you are and which organisation you represent. And just a word of warning again, anyone speaking in Welsh, obviously the microphones, the headphones are on your desk, so get them ready just in case. Okay, I saw someone here, yeah, the lady there.
I'm allowed to press? Okay. Jackie Jones, Wales Assembly of Women. Thank you very much for all the speeches today. I just wanted to make one comment about the European Union, and that is Commissioner Viviane Reding has last week published her proposals about quotas in boardrooms. And she has called for 40% quotas for non-executive directors throughout the listed companies, the top 100 listed companies, as a temporary measure till 2028. And as we all know, David Cameron is not in favour of obligatory measures, so hopefully we can all band together to help her in her view, and therefore also helping Wales and Jane's agenda about equal representation.
I'm going to take a few questions and then, or points, and then put them to the panel, if that's okay. Lady at the back there.
Thanks very much. Joy Kent, currently working for Cymorth Cymru, and after Christmas working with Coroteg. Thank you very much for the presentation and the report. I think the report's really, really interesting. I'd like to go back to something that you said at the beginning about third sector organisations delivering public services, and if we can't get the gender balance right, do we have a role in delivering public services? And I think it's a really good question. But I'd like to go back to what Stephen was saying about local government. Obviously, local government deliver public services, and I think looking at the report, you've made it clear as well about the lack of balance in local government. So if third sector shouldn't be delivering public services if we can't get the gender balance right, what are your thoughts on local government delivering public services? And also, I guess, a follow-on thought from that is, if the third sector was delivering more public services, wouldn't that be a step in the right direction? Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bablin Malik, here with Women Making a Difference. I've recently been a participant in public life, standing in the a by-election locally. What I found was the problem was the lack of training and lack of support once you put your hand up and said, okay, I'll do it. So I think that in order to encourage more women to come forward, we need to provide that support. And the other thing is that we need to tackle it on the other end, basically. So the whole hostile and macho-ness in politics needs to be tackled before women can enter. I found it very difficult being a woman who we do think more emotionally than probably most men do, and having that kind of environment doesn't help. So we need to tackle those things before we can get more women to participate. I'm not a fan of quotas, as Norma was pointing out. I'd rather be a woman standing on her own merits, although we don't agree on that point. But I think once we've got the support and once we've tackled the mind frame of the people already in those fields, we can surely see more women coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Lady there, and then we'll put it to the panel.
Thank you very much. Jackie Roberts, currently the Chief Constable of Dyfed Powys Police, so I've got a vested interest even in what you said in relation to PCCs, and perhaps enlarge a little bit on what the lady ahead of me asked the question as well, is because of the difficulties in the stats across government, we've seen that the great proportion of PCCs appointed to come from political allegiances, and only a small proportion, although perhaps more than we might have expected, come from independent candidates. What do we do now to encourage more women to get themselves ready to put themselves forward in 4 years' time? Because I don't think we can afford to wait until a year before when we try then and encourage women to raise their profiles, because they need to start doing it now if we're going to really affect change for the future.
Thank you very much. I think there's something for everybody in those questions. So please, you know, I'll ask you to just pick up on the areas that you're most interested in your responses. Jane first.
Thank you very much. A very quick response to Jackie on the point about PCCs. I mean, I think there are huge barriers to people, let alone women, standing in PCCs. I'll hand over to Steve for that because they're going to do a review of it, and I hope it's going to be very robust in terms of the way forward. And of course, we did have a woman standing in your patch, and I was certainly out banging doors. But of course, it was very difficult to get over what this was about as well. So that's a big issue. I just want to say, Jackie Jones from Wales Assembly for Women, yes, I mean, the Commission has recognised, the Commission has always been at the forefront of helping to make this kind of social change. We'll certainly be looking very carefully at our legal options in terms of how we can progress, as Norma says, on the Norwegian-style quotas for us in Wales. But I mean, we have the backing of the Commission. I mean, I always remember years and years and years ago when European structural funds actually had a women's route to funding, which was regarded as revolutionary, and I'm talking 30 years ago. But it helped us set up women's workshop training schemes, etc., and the Commission is at the forefront. I know I'm going to answer a point from everyone, but Joy, it's crucial that we look at local government, and Steve, again, they've done all this work, but we brought in a local government measure through the Assembly, through the Welsh Government and the Assembly, with Assembly support, which actually says that every authority now has to do a survey of successful and unsuccessful candidates to reflect on it and bring it to us within 6 months. We're awaiting that, and I think that also addresses Babin's point as well, because you put yourself forward, which was fantastic, through making a difference. Political parties, and obviously that includes ours, should have given you the training and support you needed to win that seat. And we know we have to learn from your experience, and so feeding it back today, I have to say, is very important indeed. So I think I've covered as many as I can, but left one out. But
thank you very much,
all
Jane.
from me, because I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave you.
No, we understand that. Thanks for your contribution today. Steve, over to you.
Just in terms of Bablin's comment, I think I always see it as kind of a two-stage process, really. There needs to be measures put in place which women are able to kind of get to the door of elected politics, but once they get there, the door's got to be actually open for them to go through, stand as candidates and hopefully win in public elections. So I think all of the work that's been spoken of today about support and mentoring and training, some of the kind of the confidence, capacity, capability, all of that kind of building up your position to be able to go out in public life is crucially important, and quite often it does pay a dividend. But sometimes, quite often, it isn't enough, and political parties need to do some of the kind of the structural stuff, unlocking some of those doors to make sure that when you do get talented women ready, that actually the opportunities are there for them to take. I'd go back to, just in terms of your point as well, which I thought was quite interesting, and so just in terms of like the culture of politics. And again, I kind of hear quite often people talk about the feminisation of the National Assembly compared to the House of Commons. I think, you know, we had fringes at the Welsh Labour and Plaid Cymru party conferences. We had John Griffiths and Leslie from Plaid Cymru speaking at them, and both of them spoke about how better it was working at this end of the M4 than the other end of the M4, and actually they didn't like the kind of the Arbu politics, the kind of macho grandstanding. Yes, you have political disagreements and you know, rip pieces out of each other when it's about the kind of the political issue, but not when it's about personality or what you're wearing or kind of, you know, how you come across. So I think it's not just women who kind of thrive in a more open political culture. Men, some types of men can as well. And just very quickly, just in terms of the kind of the all-women shortlist, all I would say is, as a man, men haven't really had much of a problem getting elected through all-male shortlists, because effectively that's what we've had. We organise in the golf club, in the rugby club, we talk to each other, we hand down and inherit power off of each other, we groom and mentor each other, and we've been doing that for centuries. So it's quite interesting when I ever hear women who are perhaps a little bit reticent about all-women shortlists because they want to be promoted on talent and merit alone. Well, you know, we haven't been doing that, and we've done quite well, so you might want to reflect on that. Just in terms of the police point, The Centre for Women in Democracy, which is led by Nan Sloan, has done a wealth of work on single elected positions, things like elected mayors and now police commissioners. And if anybody's interested, I'd urge you to go have a look on their website. And what we're finding is, in elected politics across the board, men are more advantaged than women. When it comes to single executive offices like mayors and police commissioners, men are more advantaged, even more advantaged than women. So you see more male candidates than you would for Parliament or the Assembly. You see more male candidates for things like police commissioners. So it's no surprise that we've got four male police commissioners in Wales. It's the Electoral Commission who are going to be doing the formal review. So part of their kind of statutory role is to have a look at how the elections work. We're going to be asking them to look at the issue of the Welsh language ballots and who was it who forgot to print the Welsh language ballots until the last minute to kind of do a bit of digging there. But I think also we could think about asking the Electoral Commission to think about why is it that women found it so difficult. Just two things I would say is, one is money. So to stand as a police commissioner candidate, you've got to pay a deposit of £5,000. And again, you come back to the whole issue around the gender pay gap there and the amount of money, not just for deposit, but for actually getting selected and then running your election. It's kind of, I don't think many members of the public realise how much individual candidates dip into their own pocket and pay for it on top of what the political party pays for it. So money's a big issue. And secondly, again, I think parties probably need to look at how they select candidates. So for parties like Labour, where, in '99, where they used twinning for the National Assembly, should it consider some kind of twinning where you twin two police authorities together and select a man and a woman from that? So.
Right, just a few points that are made. If I go first to the one about local authorities being representative, from the research that was done both at the national level and within Wales, one of the things that is concerning is that a lot of appointments to charitable bodies are ex officio, or they're appointed by a local authority. Everybody has, like the Welsh Joint Education Committee or others, which is not gender balance, incidentally. They're appointed mainly by local authorities. And that's true of some publicly appointed bodies like the Parks Authorities, Brecon Parks and the others, which don't necessarily do well on gender balance. So there is an issue there that if the local authority has appointing powers to these bodies, they do it, and they're not very gender balanced themselves, they do it without conferring with one another about that being a priority. You do get then the imbalance translated into other organizations. So your point actually has quite a number of ramifications. There was a question here from women making a difference about the confidence building, the learning and developing, the mentoring, and there's a huge amount to do around that. And people who are working to get women onto private sector boards now are actually building into that whole kinds of things around networking and mentoring, seminars, and making sure that people network across gender and across organizations. Otherwise, you're taking someone and saying, I think you're really good, you might want to apply for this, and they just feel like a fish out of water for it. And it's so important, and maybe that's something we can do within the networks within Wales, combining with maybe some headhunters and some others, is to make it a package so that you know the door's open to apply for a public appointment, but you're getting the coaching and the mentoring and the help that you need to actually say, I'm confident to do this, and I understand what I'm going to be asked in the interview and everything else. And the success rate then, I think, really goes up. You also mentioned about the hostility of styles in politics that turn a lot of women off, that you think it's too cut and thrust. I think it was you. And there is also, in terms of training and development of both men and women, a huge area that we need to address about leadership styles, because gender is a culture, and the leadership style within gender is different than the leadership style for women than the leadership style for men. And there are lots of overlays in it, but basically we need to actually think about what the leadership styles are that women have, how they bring value, and how you can demonstrate they bring value, so that when you walk into the room for an interview, people don't say, oh, not very assertive, not very confident, wanted to talk about what her team did rather than what she did. There are all those things that affect women because of leadership styles, and we need to crack that one, which we haven't yet.
Okay, I think we've got time for another round of questions or points. Lady at the back there.
If we just look at the recent by-election and how many men had been put forward, and particularly, I'm trying not to mention party politics, but the safe seat had a white man standing, and Bablin wasn't standing in the safe seat. And there's in my experience from the feedback we've had from women who have put themselves forward, whether it's for council or whether it's for assembly or whether it's as an MP, there's a limit to how many times they're going to be put forward for seats that aren't safe. And it's kind of a bit of a glass cliff. Because I think, as Steve said, there is a cost to being a candidate. And, you know, in your own terms of your own time, your family's time, everything else that goes into it. And how often is Bablin going to put herself in that position, take all the flack that goes with it, unless she's going to be put up for that safe seat. And it's not really showing in the evidence that we have that our women are getting being put forward. And so, you know, perhaps we have to change that kind of mindset too.
Okay, lady in blue here. Yes, please.
Iawn, diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much. May I also thank the panel for their comments this morning. They've been very valuable and interesting. I'm Bronwen. I'm the Chief Executive of Ceredigion County Council, and as one of the councils that Stephen referred to, I'm going to keep away from the political field because a number of points have been made to promote candidates. But is there a way of being more practical again in the mentoring role? Because our county, some would say that we're comical for a number of reasons, but from looking at those statistics of the small number of members, a third of our cabinet members are women. The leader of the council is a woman, and we're one of those few councils, if not the only council, that has a chief executive and leader who are women. But I know from my context that it's very important to have that element of mentoring, and it concerns me, what do we do as women? Do we draw the ladder up behind us? Because when the chief executive role came up in Ceredigion, the last chief executive of Dyfed, John Phillips, it didn't take very long before he rang and said, well, I take it that you will put your name forward. And I said, well, yes, I'm considering it, but he said it's time for you to consider it more positively. And there was mentoring. I had been cooperating for years before that, and perhaps what we can do in a very small way is ensure that we do mentor for the future and give confidence for the people who come after us to put themselves forward, either as politicians or as senior officers as well.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Ellen Jones from Hywel. It's me again, sorry. I'm a former teacher, and I'm very interested to hear how much emphasis is put on training and mentoring, and in seeing what that inconsistency is in terms of teachers and head teachers in the education sector. Is there any direction that the panel could give us on the way that education itself or schools in Wales could do more to prepare women to participate in public life?
We'll take one more and then I'll put it to the panel here.
Thanks. Kay Richmond, Women's Equality Network Wales. I'd just like to pick up on a point that was made earlier and ask for your help and input, really. We would like to pick up on the European point that was made earlier. All too often the European Union comes in for adverse comment, and I think this is one place where we can use it to help us. And just to let you know that Eleanor and I from WEN sit on a body called the UK Joint Committee for Women, and we have a meeting this weekend in Belfast. And through that, on the European Women's Lobby, and we obviously are going to be working with people like Jackie and others to try and promote that statement from the from Reading in the forthcoming in the future. So if you have comments or any information you would like to give us for that, perhaps today would be the opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Norma to respond first to anything that's relevant to her, and then Steve.
Right. Not sure I can cover all of your points. There was a comment in the very beginning about seats not being, about safe seats and the cost of someone to stand over and over again in terms of probably monetary time and wear and tear. And I was thinking, I'm not sure I have an answer for it, but I was thinking about some of what Philip was saying to us this morning and some of the literature around women's development. I think what's really important, if you plan, you need to plan that this is a career thing you want to do, and you start building towards it years in advance, really, and time in advance, and you create your personal brand and you raise your profile. Now, it can be expensive to raise profile in an old-fashioned way of literature and print and all those kind of things. But if you can use the web effectively, and you can do what was being described that Obama did with different kind of communities, you may find when it comes time to get elected that you're a shoo-in, because you've actually covered all the bases in advance and you appear to be the candidate. So I think there is something about forward planning and about being very careful about building brand and profile, personal brand and profile. Just to turn quickly to the Ceredigion County Council Chief Executive's comment about mentoring. Mentoring is so important, and it's something that can be structured, it can be informal, but it has to be there. A lot of networks are now starting to develop peer mentoring and co-mentoring, and it can be done in many different ways. One of the really interesting experiments in mentoring was what the female footsie, the Cranfield people, really instigated with the female footsie index. A group of people came together, and chairs and chief executives of the FTSE 100 companies started actually mentoring what they called board-ready women, or women that were about to be board-ready. They might be finance directors someplace, or they'd shown talent in running a division, and actually to mentor them outside of their own organizations. So sometimes it's helpful to do that cross-company mentoring, and increasingly the literature says you need a sponsor, not just a mentor. You need someone who's powerful, who can sponsor you within your organization or in the field where you want to make a mark, and there are different things that come out of sponsorship and mentoring. Another thing that I think people really ought to consider, and particularly young Gen Y women, is mentoring up, and organizations building into their mentoring programs an opportunity for 360-degree mentoring, because a lot of the baby boomer men who are still in power and who have actually trained the generation of men that come below them need to hear what these young women have to say and how they're experiencing the workplace, because they are 59% of university graduates across women in the UK today, and we cannot afford to lose their talent. And the organizations have to have cultures that let them perform. So I'm all for mentoring up. You mentioned over here, the woman in blue, about being a former teacher. Schools, the younger you can create and inculcate inequality in boys and girls about their aspirations, the more important it is, because they carry that all their life. And I think there's huge work to be done there in terms of curriculum, experiences that children are given, but probably also in the management and direction of the education sector. And one of the next reports I'm looking at is the FE sector, universities FE, and maybe it would make sense to drill down into what's happening below further education. Right. I'm sorry, I don't have any insights on EU.
Just in terms of Paula's question about by-elections, I think I do hear what you're saying, and it's, you know, in many ways it was shocking that of all the parliamentary candidates in the Cardiff South and Penarth by-election, and I think there were 8, were they? I lost track with the amount of leaflets that came through my door. But there was only one female candidate, seven male candidates. So clearly there's an issue. But again, I think just in terms of by-elections, they are so kind of particular, so special, so kind of, you don't know when they're going to happen. Political parties very often will have, a local political party might have somebody who is kind of the designated heir to the seat, or the party hierarchy might have somebody who they are looking for a seat to kind of you know, put them in there so they get into the Assembly or Parliament. By-elections, by and large, kind of operate on a different set of rules in a different kind of political culture than ordinary general elections and ordinary assembly elections, and I think that's where the most of the work and most of the effort needs to go in. I mean, from some of the, I've got Owen, who's our campaigns and research officer at the back, and he's the the guy who's got all the information and stats in his head. But we looked at assembly members who had previously been candidates. We looked at the new generation, those 23 new assembly members who came in 2011. And I think what we found was disproportionately, the women had stood previously elsewhere for unwinnable seats, where quite often the men had come in for the first time and stood and had won. So clearly there's something going on where women have to prove themselves in unwinnable seats to just get their foot in the door. And again, as we heard it, it's not a level playing field, full stop, in terms of being a candidate. The other thing, I suppose there's I'm thinking of the Rotherham by-election, which is coming up as well, and the Labour Party had a short list of 2 women, and it's quite interesting, again, how that's gone down in the press. So whilst there are a lot of people who do advocate all-women shortlists and positive measures like that, clearly political parties need just to think about the messaging and how they relate to local parties, because sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly, but sometimes these actions can be seen as the leadership foisting candidates upon the local party. But yeah, no, I think selection procedures for by-elections need to be looked at by the parties. In terms of Bronwyn's point, and Norma's point as well, actually, I just thought in terms of mentoring and sponsorship, it perhaps, I hear what you say in terms of men have historically mentored and sponsored men, and women need to do more to mentor and sponsor women. But I think also there's there's an opportunity for women to mentor and sponsor men as well. So a new generation of male leaders who are coming through public life are actually more aware of issues around equality, more take a more gendered view, understand more why women's representation is important. I just only this morning heard some very practical work that was going on in Wrexham Council, where one of the political groups there was taking, and this wasn't just based on gender, it was also based on a new intake of councillors, but had quite a sophisticated programme of mentoring. So new councillors were learning the ropes with somebody who's perhaps been there a longer time. So there's clearly things that can be done there. And in terms of candidate selection, again, I think political parties just need to, it comes back to good old-fashioned organisation, I think. If you're in a political party and you want to get more women elected in your county for the next council elections, then the women and the like-minded men need to sit down basically in a room, look at what are the winnable seats, what good candidates do you have, or okay, how are we going to get them selected? It's pretty much an old-fashioned political organisation, that job that needs to go on top of all the mentoring and coaching. And lastly, I don't really have much to add to Norma's comments around political education, other than I think there's a wider question about how we use political education in Wales to make sure that young people fully understand the nature of democracy, what it means to be a citizen, how important it is to vote, and all those allied issues. So perhaps for another day and another presiding officers conference.
Thank you. Can I just make one point that seems to have featured in lots of questions around mentoring and support, and it's something that I feel quite passionate about. I mentioned it in my introductory remarks about the responsibilities that we all have as women leaders. And there's several here, and I don't think we all know each other, which is one fundamental flaw. We don't have our own effective network of senior, in inverted commas, women in Welsh public life. Men have plenty of those. We don't. We need to make our own. I think that's really very, very important, because we all embrace mentoring, I think, those of us who understand that we are role models, and we do a lot of formal mentoring through Sport Wales with our talented young women coming through, and we do a lot of informal mentoring. And for me, it's about simply prioritising women. So of the swathes of requests for assistance I get, I prioritise the women amongst that, because I don't think they'll get it anywhere else, really. But it's not even about that formality. For me as well, it's about introducing women to our worlds, really. And the more we introduce women to our worlds by taking them along to dinners, you won't believe how many dinners sport has. Believe me, it's a black tie tracksuit environment. Believe me, there's literally nothing in between. But if you take young women along with you to various events, they learn 2 things very quickly. They learn, first of all, how poor the calibre of men in public life is, because they will chat to them informally, and it will give them enormous confidence that they are not only only better, but incredibly better than most of the men who hold positions in public life. It's the first thing, and they invariably say that to me afterwards. And secondly, they develop connections and friendships and networks that they can then utilize to good effect in terms of what they do next. And it really is, for me, as simple as that. You know, get people out with you in the field and introduce them to other women and men, because there's some fabulous men as well as those men who are disappointing. There's some fabulous young men, actually, who are really passionate about equality that we don't connect well enough with. And then, so I think that's really important. But also, the one thing that I always say to women that I'm involved in mentoring or being mentored by, because I think we still need as much mentoring as people at other stages of progress, is you have got to be yourself. You know, don't look at somebody else and copy or imitate, whether that's male or female, actually, because the only way you can be a success, I think, as a leader is to be very much at ease with who you are and where you're from, how you speak, your own world, your own relationships, your own interests and pastimes and so on. If you can't relax into the role, you will be a poor leader, because you will be imitating and will be ill at ease with what your natural instincts are. And that actually is probably the hardest single thing that you can get through to women, is that actually we come in all shapes and sizes. There isn't one exemplary model of a good woman leader. Learn, obviously, you know, and hopefully absorb into your own style, but don't imitate, don't copy, you know, mold it to suit who you are, because that literally is the only way that women will feel relaxed about leadership, in my view, anyway. I think we've got about 5 minutes, Presiding Officer, before lunch or so. So if there is any pressing last comment that anyone has to make. Lady there.
Helo, Gwenno Dafydd ydw I, a dwi'n gweithio...
I'm Gwenno Dafydd and I work as an advocate on leadership and public speaking. But one thing that comes through very clearly, I feel, here is the word confidence, or a lack of confidence. And I think that Norma was talking about something that happened earlier in people's lives. I've been working in schools with a scheme for years 8, girls in year 8, to develop their confidence. And the name of the scheme is Popty Pŵer. And Popty Pŵer gives skills for the future to develop confidence. And I think that we should be going to the schools and starting very early, because in primary schools, the confidence amongst boys and girls is equal and it's very similar. But once they move on to the secondary schools, then things start to change. And by the time they leave universities, perhaps women are 58% of people who take degrees. But what happens after that? And I think once you've reached universities, it's too late. The work has to be done in the secondary schools and in the early years, so that they realize that they have these possibilities and they should be contributing much more than they do already. And self-confidence is the thing that prevents women, when they are in the universities, as well as when they reach maturity and they go into the world at large. So I do think that it's important to concentrate on developing this confidence. And is there a possibility perhaps of thinking about getting programs to spread into schools more than they do at present?
Would you like to say anything briefly?
I guess I would very much agree that confidence building needs to be established very young, where young girls and young boys feel they have equal opportunities for whatever they want to do in life, and they can both achieve. And a lot of that comes down to how the teachers interact with them. Excuse me, I have a bad cold. And also whether or not they're stereotyped. And it's, I agree with you, basically. I'm not quite sure what the curriculum would look like, but developing young leaders is very important, and developing confidence is very important.
Simon, sorry, Steve, very briefly.
I've never underestimated the power of being asked to do something. I was involved in a selection myself, and one of the female candidates we were encouraging to stand had thought about becoming a member of Parliament, but the very fact that party members went up to her and asked her to consider standing was enough was actually boosted her confidence to think, you know what, there are other people out there who think I could be an MP. It's not just something that's going on in my head. So I think absolutely in terms of the formal school curriculum, we should be equipping children with those skills so they don't have to wait to be asked. But I think all of us in this room, when we spot talent, should ask them, have you ever thought about going into public office?
Well, Guy, just through
May I just thank the speakers and also to the Minister, of course, and to you all for your contributions.
Much indeed to you all for your really interesting contributions, and of course to the three speakers for providing the context for this really important discussion.
The National Assembly for Wales is the democratically elected body that represents the interests of Wales and its people, makes laws for Wales, and holds the Welsh Government to account. For more information and to find out who represents you, go to assemblywales.org or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.